Thank you. So this is going to go over our 1920 proposed budget that the school board has approved as of last Tuesday. As I go through it, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them as we're going through it. It'll probably be easier for me to respond to help remember what I just said rather than going back.
I'm sorry, Andy, before you get too far into it, the copy of the handouts that you have are the ones that we had last month. Andy just informed me there's probably going to be some updated information on here, so I'm going to let him bring those to your attention, so there may be some changes to this. Let him know.
Right, so by and large, the presentations are the same. We did roll in the changes that the board made via board amendment into this presentation, and there's a few extra slides that we had omitted prior for time consideration. So jumping into it, the agenda will talk about the budget development cycle, the assumptions that we made since we introduced our pro forma, and we briefed this committee back in December, which was really, here's our static budget and what our revenue guidelines were, our expectations at that time. So we did make updates to those. And then we'll talk about what the district is investing in, some of the new changes we're making, and our total expenditures, staffing, and then just kind of an overview of personnel and funding changes by area. And then we'll open it up for more questions or what this body may like to see in the future, or any sort of resolution that you'd like to see passed. So the budget development cycle, right now, we are in beginning of March. We've got the budget approved by the school board. We turned it into the municipality yesterday. So the clerk has it, and we will have the initial hearing of it Tuesday, and then 2 weeks after that, we will have hopefully have the approval of that budget. And then now we're still currently watching the...
Sorry. I'm with Dick Training now. I think we should move this building, the office over to Central High School after trying to find parking.
And we'll keep watching the legislative session and keep you guys updated as we know more about what changes they're proposing. So changes that we've made after the pro forma was submitted. We did add $3.25 million within our existing tax structure to fund our transportation deficit. For several years now, we've been running a deficit within our transportation account, largely due to the law that says we need to pay bus drivers 2 times the minimum wage. Whenever the voters approved the minimum wage increases a few years ago, that really triggered the spike in costs for us. So prior to that, we were self-sufficient within that fund. Once that took effect, it was about an immediate 10% deficit within that fund.
Municipal law, state law?
It is state statute that we pay bus drivers 2 times the minimum wage.
Andy, I just want to mention, it's hard to hire bus drivers. Even at that rate, we're having a hard time recruiting and keeping bus drivers. So
right, and it's not seasonal and generally not full-time work.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have, you probably drive around, you see the signs, now hiring bus drivers. So we have them up several places. We added $500,000 in new revenue for a Lower Yukon School District CTE partnership. This is the Lower Yukon School District bought the Longhouse Hotel over in Spenard. They're going to be they're going to fly their students down for 9-week intervals and take intensive CTE courses at King Tech. So they'll have like a 3rd session style where the kids come in and have a 9-week intensive thing. And so we added $500,000 in revenue from that. We also added $500,000 in associated expenditures. So the goal is to make some money off this, if not at the very least break even the first year, and then try to expand this to kind of a statewide model where other small rural districts can fly their students in as well and get them the CTE training that they may not be able to just due to the size constraints of their district. And the Lower Yukon, hopefully they can partnership with them and house their students as well, but that's more up to them, I suppose. We won a federal E-rate appeal.
Is that $500,000 for Lower Yukon School District? Is that coming from a grant that they got, or is that just coming out of their?
I believe it'll come out of their operating funds.
Okay.
They get a considerably higher amount per student than we do. They're in $25,000 per student range from state money, so they have money to do this within their operations.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it was a federal grant or something like that.
Not yet. I think they're in talks with the state administration about kind of expanding the model and making it open. Maybe the state might kick in some money to help expand that as well. But that hasn't been finalized or anything. But it's just something the Dr. Bishop and some of the state administration have been kicking around. So we're excited about that one. We did win a E-rate appeal. The E-rate, if you don't know, is the federal program that allows us to be reimbursed for telecommunication costs, largely bandwidth. So we get about $1 million every year to get reimbursed for this bandwidth. This is from a few years ago. We did a hardware upgrade in all the schools where we replaced the endpoint, the Cisco router boxes in the classroom so you could have higher density connection within the classroom. Really helped as we have kind of a 1-to-1 ratio in a lot of those classrooms when they bring in the Chromebook cards to help the connectivity within there. But we got, I think, it was 50 to 60% reimbursement on the install and purchase of that equipment. And they denied some of it at first, and this is us getting some of that back. We expect to get it back sometime next year. Interest earnings, you've watched the Federal Reserve interest rate tick up over the last, I think they've kind of planed off, but based on kind of our projection 10, we think we can get at least we will have at least another $500,000 in interest earnings. The underlying driver is the federal interest rate and the short-term earnings that we are getting on that. 5.1 million use of fund balance. I think in your slide it'll show 4.8, 4.9. That was via board amendment. The board added $200,000 to address middle school scheduling around the middle school model, and the net of that $200,000 minus $3,000 that the board reduced their travel registration money out of.
So Andy, I'd just like to say two things. First of all, before we go on to expenses, notice that expenses has both decreases and increases in it. And it was kind of confusing at the board level because so just notice that. And then second, the fund balance use over the last several years has averaged about $4 million. The district makes that up by holding positions, vacancies open longer, and doing all kinds of administrative tricks to generate that, replenish that fund. We're by statute not allowed to have more than a certain level in the fund balance, and we're we're just a little over that now, right? So we do need to use some of that fund balance, but traditionally we've been using only about $4 million. So this is a significant increase from past year's use of fund balance. And then the other really big takeaway here is the 3.25 and number A up there, or letter A, because that is completely dependent upon the assembly funding another 3.25 to the school district in this next budget cycle to help close the gap on transportation.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Donald's exactly right on the fund balance. That we're limited to carry over 10% of undesignated, or 10% of our operating expenditures as undesignated fund balance, which will include unassigned fund balance, the amount that we hold back for bond rating. The municipality has us hold back 10% of our property taxes, or about $25 million or so, as fund balance to preserve our AAA bond rating. So we have that. That's really not spendable on our part. So that leaves us, $35 million or so that we can carry over as undesignated in any given year. Right now, we are anticipating being just over that 10% mark. So that means we'll have to spend or do something with that money this year. We can't carry it over. The $5.1 million is spending money that we can carry over. So we anticipate ending at about 10% of our fund balance, which is, close to $60 million, 25 of that being designated to preserve our bond rating. The other amount is also limited by board policy, where we can't go below an 8% of our operating expenditures minimum. So that gives us about a $12 million window between the 8 and 10%. So we're proposing using about 5.1 million of that 12. On the expense side, we just negotiated our wireless internet and telecommunications contract. It's about $1 million less than what we had projected in our pro forma, several $100,000 less than what we're currently paying. So we got a good deal on that that I wasn't expecting. So that's good. We reduce our costs where we can. We're decreasing our utility costs at Mount Spur, Eagle River, and Gruninget schools. Because those schools are going to be closed, we can take the utilities off. And we left some money within them to do kind of the operations and maintenance of the folks going in just to kind of preserve the building, but it's not at the same level you would have if you had students in there. We reduced the staff at Mount Spur, Eagle River, and Gruning. That's largely going to be principals, nurses, BPOs. A lot of the ones, the counselors, teachers assistants, those follow the students. So it's all kind of the ancillary staff out there at those schools. So we were able to reduce some of those staff, and we'll look at that a little bit later, which
So
staff those were.
Those two these are kind of one-time costs, the savings, right? I mean, once the schools.
For Mount Spur, it'll be indefinite,
Yeah.
but Eagle River and Gruning is expected to reopen at some point, and those will have to go back.
So you've actually pink slipped principals also from those schools?
There were, yes, we don't need the principal at Mount Spur and Eagle River. We kept the Gruning principals because they're going to operate as a standalone school within Chugach High School. But Mount Spur and Eagle River, they're being rebounded and going into those schools as, like Eagle River will be Birchwood and Homestead Fire Lake students at this point. So they're not going to have a Eagle River principal, as Eagle River won't exist as a school. We do have enough turnover. We don't expect those people to go away or have to find other employment, as we have, probably 10 or 12 retirements at least out of that principals group each year. We're going to the Paideia lease. It's at the district's home school or correspondence school. It's about $67,000. The lease that we have with I think it's First Presbyterian Church, where the school is currently located. It's not an ideal location. They have accessing the building has proven difficult, and also occasionally they have funerals going through there, so you have to kind of cordon off students. It's not an ideal facility, so we're going to move that school into Central. Central's enrollment is low enough where we can reasonably take a wing of that school and turn it into our centralized correspondence school. So we're kind of excited about that change. That'll make it look like more like a real school, more than those parents having to come into a church. $500,000 decrease in the cost of leave. A lot of that's just calculating how much usage we think folks are going to take, the more leave they use versus what they cash out. More of an accounting thing than anything, but it's also fewer employees. So we have fewer employees, less dollars going to leave. And then the $1.5 million decrease in the district-wide attrition account. The district-wide attrition is an offset that we use for when positions go unfilled for a period of time or any length, or come in at a lower amount. That creates a positive budget in some area. So we'll be under our budget in some areas. So we centralize an account for district-wide attrition. I believe it's up to $19 to $20 million, roughly 3% or so of expenditures that we expect to capture back as positions going unfilled or lower than what they were budgeted. And a lot of that has to do with medical expenses. So whenever folks waive medical insurance, we don't pay into either the district's health insurance fund or the teacher's health insurance fund. So we have roughly 700 people waive insurance in any given year. For this year, we had about 700. I think it was 600 last year. We've gone to tiered systems within those. Both the district and the AEA has gone to tiered systems where instead of having one rate per employee, it'll be separated between employee only, employee spouse, employee family. So as you tier those rates, a few more folks have dropped out of the district's health insurance. As you know, it's higher cost for employee family, but they may be insured under some other another spouse's coverage, so they don't reasonably need to pay a higher employee copay to be double covered.
Andy, these changes in assumptions that you're talking about, are these the result of anything to do with the governor's proposal, or are these separate from that? Are these before the governor's budget announcement came out?
No, so yeah, these are all before the governor's proposal came out, and these don't incorporate anything from the governor's proposal. As we just use what is in statute to create our budget. So we don't reasonably think that the governor's proposal will be the final budget either. So we don't want to go in and make all those changes based on anything introduced legislation, whether it be from the governor or any other legislator at this point. And then the $2.3 million, that's an increase in our special services. A lot of that's going to preschool programs as we get better at identifying those students that need special education in pre-K. We had to put quite a bit more money into those programs. And we're legally obligated to provide special ed services to anyone from 3 to age 21. So we have a pretty wide span that we have to cover, and the preschool is not necessarily covered under state funding either. So that's what makes it more difficult, is unless the students are intensive needs, they're not covered within the state foundation formula. This is the chart showing our general fund revenue for next year versus what we have adopted in this year. It should largely be the same as the sheet you have in front of you, with the exception of the use of fund balance has gone to $5.06 million, where it was $4.86. So that's the result of adding $200,000 for the middle school model.
The actual total expenditure is about 804 million if you count all revenue. And with the amendments that happened last week, there's a request for an additional 81 million. So the total authorized spending is about $885 million.
Yep.
But 81 of that is authorized, but there's no revenue source for it.
Right, and we'll talk about some of those grants that we put in here shortly. So going forward, some of the new stuff that we're doing this year, we want to keep increasing, keep getting better as a district. So some of the new things that we've put in with our limited resources have been the ASD NEA Teacher Mentor Program. I believe we added, I think it was around $300,000 to help to all the new teachers that we get, to bring them in for a few days prior to school starts, prior to them being in their buildings, so they can have a more robust onboarding program, so you're not just putting these new teachers in the schools and say, here you go. So we'll have a onboarding and then bring them on periodically throughout the year, check in with them, how you doing, what can we help you with, and then provide additional professional development in there. So that's the Teacher Mentor Program, the new induction program. We budgeted wireless access control for 10 schools. That's getting away from the metal keys and into the card readers, essentially. That'll allow both our maintenance folks, custodians, and APD to easily access these facilities rather than having like a big stack of keys. School intercom upgrades. I think we put $100,000 or so in there to help upgrade our just kind of the aging infrastructure within the buildings. And this doesn't cover all of this. A lot of these things that we're putting in, it's not going to cover the total the replacement cost in any given year. For replace the outdated student devices and display tech, I think we have $1.2 million or so to replace those. We have about a $4.5 to $5 million need every year to be able to replace our student devices and student and staff devices. So we just kind of want to build on these increases so eventually we can get to a point where we are self-sustaining in our curriculum needs and our infrastructure and our technology. The increase in special education support, largely kindergarten. There's some other supports all around within middle school, high school, and elementary. And then kind of continue the positive work we've done on the MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support. It's being able to, a lot of that's going along with the differentiation of instruction and being able to train our teachers how to better differentiate instructions to students who some students may learn different than others. So continue that. The partnership with Lower Yukon we discussed. And then we're going to increase our high school summer school program. And a lot of this is credit recovery, learning to help keep those graduation rates at where we want them to be and increase them. So there's a lot of students that do need that credit recovery at the end of the year to help just get the few credits they need to graduate. So that's what that is. And then we'll have the $5.1 million in fund balance to retain PTR. Hopefully our goal is to not, in any years, to not have to increase PTR. We didn't increase PTR this year, but we did use fund balance to avoid that.
That's the teacher ratio, right?
The pupil-teacher ratio, sorry.
Pupil-teacher ratio, thanks. I'm like, how do I get the student in there? Oh, okay, pupil.
I will say, though, that the board's amendment regarding middle school structure will impact the pupil-teacher ratio in the middle schools different than the document indicates as the target. Currently, it's about 27 per class, and these are not. Doesn't mean that every class has 27 kids. They can have up to 31 or 32 in some cases, and some other classes might have a few or less, but it's the average spread out over the whole district. There's going to be a 3 to 4 student increase now in all the middle school classes, which means the classes could go from, could go all the way up to 36, some of them, because the cost of the middle school restructuring is really over $3 million, but the board only put $200,000 in to pay for it.
Right. They had a committee of teachers and principals came up with middle school modeling. That was part of the contract agreement with the Anchorage Education Association to put in this committee to make a recommendation to the board for what the middle school model should look like. The first recommendation was to keep the PTR the same at 27 and have 2 planning periods or teach 5 of 7 classes, which would add about $3.3 million to add enough teachers in that pool to be able to provide 2 planning periods and have an average of 27 kids in a class. 1 planning period is designated for just their personal planning time, and then the second planning period is designated to team planning time under that model, where the middle school teams can get together and discuss their students and their progress. And I don't exactly know what they do, frankly, but I can tell you how much it costs. So,
does that planning time, going to 2 planning sessions, does that actually take away from face-to-face time with the students, or is this in addition to?
So it wouldn't if you added the money to it. So what Mr.
The
Donnelly
$3 million,
referenced is their second option under their guidance back to the board was to increase the PTR to 30 from 27 and then add the planning time on top of that. So the net, it's to do that after we modeled it was about 1.6 FTE that we needed to do it. So the cost, there wasn't much of a cost difference. It didn't add personnel. It just changed the structure and the conversation of here's the new PTR, but we are putting this planning time in there. And frankly, I think the principals have a certain amount of leeway they can do within their own scheduling, where if they really wanted to, they probably could have done this model prior to that with the same PTR and the same staff they had. Because the $200,000, it really doesn't add staff. It's maybe 1 or 2. So that's what they came up with. At the end of the night, one of the board members added an amendment to put in $200,000 to help address some of their issues. We used some of the money. We settled the collective bargaining agreement contracts, the biggest one being the teachers. We added money for programmatic roof maintenance that hasn't been done. We're using a company called Trimco that comes and puts a spray coating on the roofs to give them a life extension, and then come out and do preventative maintenance on those roofs as well. If you let them go, you've seen the pictures of them where they just kind of deteriorate, and then you have to replace an entire roof, and it's several $1 million to do that. So we have put an increased emphasis on programmatic roof replacement or maintenance. We're increasing some PD and course offerings with pre-AP and AP. I don't know if this is a cost thing, but it's certainly an emphasis that the administration wants to put on just on the way learning is done. Increased project lead the way pathway. Generally, when we're giving these presentations, we had someone from the instructional side here to explain what some of this stuff was. So I'm not exactly sure what that one was off the top of my head. But the K-8 literacy and English language arts, that's ELA, we put money, about $1 million in to help pay for the next phase of language arts adoption. That curriculum was last updated in 2004. We've updated the K through 5. At this point, we're going to do 6 through 8 next year.
So Andy, I have a question, and maybe this is a question that Mr. Donnelly can answer. Is I think we're in our 3rd year now of using the MAP test inside of schools. So 2 things here. One is the MAP testing is measures of academic progress, and so what happens is if you don't have a kid in the school system, just so you understand how it works, is your kid goes in, then everybody takes the MAP test. They're normed to, you have a 5th grader, here's how your 5th grader compares to national norms, here's the growth we expect to see in the next quarter, and then at least at my school, they take the November-December test, and you can see how the kids are progressing against those norms in both science or math and reading. With 3 years of this, and then that happens again in the spring, and so you can see the progress of your child against those norms, which is fantastic. I love it as a parent. We're starting to get to the point where we have 3 years worth of data now, which means that we can go into individual schools and see patterns for teachers, who's adding value, who's not adding value, which schools are adding value, which schools are not adding value. Does the school administration, or the school board have any intent on putting money into analyzing that data and using it in any way? I'll just throw the hot potato out there.
I can't speak for the administration. I can't speak for the rest of the school board. But this is a really good question, and it's really important because those MAP scores give the district the first opportunity literally it's ever had to seek accountability all the way down to the classroom level and to identify what's going on and distinguish classroom from classroom. But the board has been very shy about discussing the potential uses of that information.
Okay. So let me back up, because, which is that apparently we do MAP in the fall, we do MAP in the spring. Apparently MAP in the middle, the November-December testing is optional. But it's that testing which really lets you know how your kid is doing in that classroom with that teacher and how the growth is. So if you just do fall testing and spring testing, then by the time you get the spring numbers, school is out and it's too late to have a conversation with the teacher. So is there an additional cost to the district of making that MAP testing in the November-December time frame required as opposed to optional? My children go to a school where that testing is, the principal opts for that testing, which then allows us as parents to have that discussion. So is there a budgetary implication for the school district?
Well, there's an instruction time implication.
Correct.
And we have 3 sets of tests now.
Right.
The national testing, have the state testing, and then there's the MAP testing.
Right.
And there are initiatives that are going on to try to reduce the number of tests. It really would help the classrooms, increase the instructional time if they didn't have to do so much testing, and try to merge some of this testing together. But there's pilot programs going on in other states about that, because you have to meet certain federal standards to be allowed to do that, and it is a long-range goal.
Okay. So I just thought it'd be worth bringing. Sorry for hijacking. Just wanted to know, like, if there were budgetary implications of pursuing any of those items.
We do have an assessment evaluation department that should be looking at this. I don't know the extent of what they're doing, so I'm generally not involved in that piece of it. But that's a very good question, and I'll certainly bring that up and get back to you.
Thanks, Andy.
It creates some really exciting possibilities, having the 3 years of data now.
Yeah.
What's going on, the social emotional learning and positive behavior support. That's a lot of what we do with professional development. It's really trying to get teachers to focus on, how they treat students, how they interact with students. Generally, just it's another one I have the instructional folks explain. Us budget folks generally aren't good at social emotional learning.
Hey, I'm right here.
Except for Lance. Lance is obviously emotional. But anyway, it's just how they relate to students. A lot of the students, really, they need someone they can connect with in the school to be more engaged. The more connected you are to the school, the more engaged. And that's kind of the theory behind the social emotional learning. K-12 class size reduction and preschool at all the elementary schools. This is what Mr. Donlin was referencing when we talked about $81 million have added into legislative grants for next year. So the school board put out amendments for K-12 class size reduction, which would be, I believe it's
15 students and 25.
15 at K through 4 or K through 3. It's on here in a minute. Anyway, 15 at lower grades and 25 at the upper grades. So by our math, it'd be you'd need about 630 additional FTE to do that, and a cost of about $68 million.
Yeah, so the K-12 is a $68 million ask, and the preschool is about 13.
About 13, yeah. And that'd put about 2 classrooms in every school.
So to be clear, there's no money for this. It's just an ask.
Right.
Yeah.
Federal grant.
No, they're hoping
State.
for
It's
state.
asked to the state, yeah.
Specified.
So you're comedians as well.
We've got a little bit of a disparity between what the district's budget is and what the governor's is.
Some of us made that point at the meeting.
Mr. Donley's credit, he did make that point. So here's by the state function. Here's where we spend our money. This changed a little bit from what you have within the instruction column. That went up by $197,000, and the district administration at the top went down by $3,000 based on the board amendments. But by and large, we spend most of our money between instruction and special education instruction. Then operation and maintenance, that includes all the maintenance in the buildings plus utilities and rent. So if you have any questions about, we can go through what kind of goes into each one of these if you'd like, or we can move along. Within our actual budget document, we do have explanations of what goes into these state functions.
So the split says 87.5% salaries and benefits. How is that split between administration and teaching staff?
Well, the state has different categories of how they ask the school districts to measure administration. You can see there's different categories. There's district administration, then there's district administration support services, and then there's support services instruction. I mean, you could arguably say all that's administration, but some of it's directly related to classroom support, and some of it's not. Some of it's like human resources and finance and other things. Those would be the district administration. So I don't want to be obtuse here, but there's different levels of administration, and they fall into categories that the state sets and defines, right, Andy?
Right, and to that point, support services instruction is probably a good view of that, because by the state standards, the elementary, secondary, the directors of those schools that are in our office and the professional learning, they fall under that category, but also the librarians do too. So it's kind of there's some of them that are school-based and working directly with kids, and some of them are going to be housed at our office just by the state standard. Within our big budget document, we do have the list of the state chart of accounts that shows what goes into each one of these functions. And certainly if you have questions about it going forward, we can tell you what's in each one. Some of them are self-explanatory. Student activities, that's sports programs, after-school programs. District admin support, that's predominantly IT, finance, HR. Then there's school admin support, it's nurses, security, counselors. So and the state defines them pretty well. And the special support services, that's also special education, but within the not direct instruction where they have the kids all day, it's the pullouts for counseling, psychology, OT, PT, and then the administration of that program. But we do spend almost 88% on salaries and benefits, and 4.8% on utilities, rents, 4.3% on other purchase services. That'll be in both instructional contracts, and we spend money on like maintenance contracts. When we have our major maintenance, we have to go out to a contractor to do repairs. We have money for that, and then supplies, equipment, and insurance. But by and large, it is in salaries and benefits, and the rest of it is somewhat fixed costs. There's a little bit of variable, but not a lot. So when you talk about having to reduce the budget, it almost always has to come out of the salaries and benefits.
I read an article yesterday, and I know that we don't anticipate the state budget to be passed, but that if it did, that the school district would have to strip down to absolutely core services. And I just was surprised to see that included eliminating the immersion programs. And I guess, I don't know, is there like an added cost?
So I'm not exactly sure what you're looking at, but no decisions have been made about what we would do if it were done. We did put out some stuff that says, here's kind of the magnitude of what it could look like, and here's the cost of these different programs. So it wasn't necessarily what the school board would do. We certainly wouldn't speak for them when we do that, but it was just here's kind of the cost of these different areas. And then I think the last one we put out showed if you were to do kind of across-the-board cuts, how many employees would that be if based on the governor's budget, which was 1,000 plus or something, almost 1,100 employees if they were to pass that. So we put some stuff out there, but nothing is set. So until we actually get a target that we have to get down to and make those cuts, then.
Well, no, I think my question was, I was just surprised to see that that's like there's an added cost of the immersion programs, and I just didn't know what that was.
Oh, the immersion programs. So the added cost generally comes in the upper grades of elementary school. So as you have, generally we put the same amount of kids in a kindergarten, first grade classes as we do regular education classes. So the cost is about the same. But as we see as those kids move away, change schools, do whatever else, having those kids come in at third grade, it's not possible because they're not fluent in the subject unless they come from a home that speaks that language. So generally in the upper grades of elementary, you see kind of the decline in the class size. And what that generally means is we have to either put extra support within that school or there's higher class sizes on the regular ed side. But for the most part, as a budgeting metric, we budget the immersion programs the same as we do any other school. And then in the high school classes, some of them may have 3 or 4 kids per section, but they'll have multiple sections per teacher per period. So a teacher will be teaching Japanese 3, 4, and 5, or whatever the numbers are, all at the same time with all the same kids in there, but there's only 4 kids assigned to that class. But they do have maybe 25 kids in the class or something. So this is an overview or a percentage reduction of staffing since FY13. It's when we really started keeping kind of good track of this, and we really started having to implement more. We had steeper reductions leading up into 13 and going on than we had prior to that. So we used 13 as a starting point of this. So we look at support services instruction. When I was talking about having those functions split between schools and the district office, about 44 of the 58 positions that were cut were in the Ed Center between our curriculum departments and professional learning. But then you can see the percentages that we've, pretty much everyone has taken cuts over the last several years. Special education instruction, this is the first year it'll be a positive increase in many years. So they took reductions as well, but now it's starting to turn the other way as we have a higher need with both intensive students and pre-K students. This is our class sizes. Current class size for 19 is at the top, the proposed at PTR at the bottom. As Mr. Donnelly referenced, we show the 27 at middle school. That could be 30, depending on how it's implemented. And then the evidence-based model is the 15 at K through 3 and 25 for 4 through 12. And that's based on a Pike-Assadin study that said here's where you get the best value. You don't make a whole lot of difference in class size until you can reach this target of 15 per class. That's when having lower class sizes really makes the biggest difference. So this is the evidence-based research that they did for many states, including our district, and we have included that as the legislative grant request.
Can you say that again, Andy, as to what those numbers were? So through K through 3, you want them at?
That's the bottom line on here. It's the K through 3, it's 15 students per class, then 25 from 4 through 12.
I'm not seeing that on my slide, that's why.
This is one of the ones that was omitted. So these are the slides where kind of, I believe we didn't include in this one, just as, the 10 minutes I had for the original presentation, I had to cut some stuff out to shorten it. But we'll give you guys this this slide, and this is also within. I'll hand out some. We got some budget pamphlets that we've made to discuss our budget when we go places. I'll hand those out as well, and we can walk. But all this information is contained in there.
It's kind of the most generally. There's other standards out there, but the Pike-Assadin is the most generally accepted gold standard of classroom size, where districts love to be. So going through some of the metrics and the changes that we've made by division. This is the elementary schools. Typically we have one librarian, one nurse, 2 office admin, and a BPO at each school. And then we have a 3.5-hour TA in every kindergarten class. We were able to reduce staff at Mount Spur and Eagle River by 6.5 and 7 respectively, and reduced 46-point teachers overall in elementary just based on the declines in enrollment that we've had both this year versus what we projected in next year's projection. We increased staffing at the school office admin level. It used to 2 per school. It used to be at, if you had a school of less than 300 students, we had a half-time secretary, but it really wasn't conducive no matter what the school size is. If one of the people need to get up or one of the people are absent, not having that other one there. So having the phone calls, the kids don't stop coming in just because there's 275 versus 325. So we've made the decision to go ahead and make 2 full-time staff on each one. And a lot of those folks are the same ones that control the front door, give access or not. So if one's called away or one's ill, then there's nobody to control the access to the front door.
Yep. So overall, we reduced almost 26, or increased 26 FTE in the SPED pre-K and 12.3 in special education TAs. So we are increasing the special education staff overall in elementary and pre-K. We added some money, so for clerical substitutes at elementary schools, since they only have 2 staff there. Whenever someone wanted to take some of the vacation, then we allow them. A lot of them felt guilty or wouldn't take it because they were just, it would be a disservice to their counterpart who didn't have they didn't have a backup there. So we've allowed them some money to be able to come in and add sub time. They can hire a substitute to come in and help out at the front counter if they're on vacation or something. If they go on extended leave for medical or maternity reasons, something like that, we've allowed them to shift money over so they can't hire subs for longer term absences. That's the current practice. So enhanced PD, we've continued to fund instructional coaches through Title I and Title IIA grants. I believe next year is the last year of having carryover funds within those to be able to provide instructional coaches. So for our FY21 budget, we'll need to have a considerable amount of conversation about how to pay for those going forward. The SEL and positive behavior MTSS supports we've discussed. And then we added funding to our kindergarten TAs. So we have a hard time filling our noon duty positions, which are the folks that come in for 2 hours a day for $10 an hour on a temporary basis to come watch the kids at lunch and recess. So we've added 2 hours to all our kindergarten TA time, so they can work up to 5.5 hours at their kindergarten TA rate to go in and do lunch duty. So this way, before a lot of the schools couldn't get any of the noon duties to come in because not a lot of people want to work for $10 an hour for 2 hours a day. So we're making it where they can hire the kindergarten TAs to go in and do that service also. It does cost more. It's about twice as much per hour to pay a kindergarten TA than it was for a temporary noon duty. That's largely because just the wage difference and paying PERS to the kindy TA positions where the noon duties are temporary.
I just wanted to say something about the instructional coaches because they were kind of controversial for a while. It was federal dollars that we could not use in the classroom. Like we couldn't hire more teachers instead of utilizing it for instructional coaches. So I really do think the administration made the right call, and it really maximized the classroom benefit from those federal dollars by doing the instructional coaching, professional development. And they really didn't have there was no option to use those monies directly to hire teachers.
And now that you've had a couple of years of those instructional coaches, are you seeing, is there evidence-based results? I mean, is there any sort of tracking as to what those coaches are delivering on the ground in their work with the teachers, now the teachers are responding?
I know the superintendent's very supportive of that program, but we have not had a report back that had any kind of metrics or data like that in it.
And that'll go along with the map testing too. I think as long, kind of the same vein as that. All right, we're running short on time, so I'm gonna get through these fairly quick. This is our metrics for middle schools. You can see the metrics at the top. We'll get you these slides out too, so you guys can have them. And it's also, again, it'll be in this book. You can see the metrics that we have. But it's really 400 to 1 for principals, 300 to 1 for counselors, 1 nurse per school, 1 BPO per school, and 3 office admin. The changes you see within are generally limited to Gruning, where we could take out the ancillary staff for the librarians, library assistant, nurse, and BPO, as we don't need to necessarily duplicate those services at Chugach High School, where those students will be housed next year. We did reduce 14 FTE just due to enrollment within the middle level. Moving on, high school.
Just want to say, when it comes to security, we have to pay for the security out of our regular state funding. There's no, in the formula right now, I think it's a real weakness. There's no separate component for security. So a school system like Anchorage that has bigger, more serious security threats because it's an urban district doesn't get any additional funding. So we have, 40 to 50 security personnel. So it does hurt us with classroom sizes also.
Yeah, we do have the SROs that are in the schools. That's paid for by the city. Those are sworn officers and paid for by APT. So we really appreciate having those those folks in the schools as well, but they can also get called away to other crimes in the neighborhood. So high schools, there's the allocations there. We're going to reduce about 19 due to decreased enrollment, and 1 counselor due to decreased enrollment as well, increasing some special education, then credit recovery, then we're putting more funding towards high schools safety equipment as the, I guess that's CTE also, the brain injury stuff from the football, you can just hit in the head. So a lot of that money is really directed towards kind of the safety around that, as there's been a lot of lawsuits nationwide of when students have injuries there, trying to kind of prevent some of that. Alternative schools, while we have a metric, a lot of these alternative schools are either special programs or behavior or credit recovery type things where they need lower PTRs and more additional, or kind of a different way of operating. Like AMCS, Alaska Middle College, we don't need much staff in that because we pay a large amount of tuition to UAA to educate those students to get the dual credit. And then Paidean was a homeschool, so they don't need quite as much staff. But then if you have like New Path, Avail, some of these ones where we have kids that are on the that need that additional support, those have more staffing than a traditional school would. But here's the staffing for those. We've increased about 3 FTE, but mostly due to increased enrollment projections within these programs. Special ed, these are the special education staffing ratios that we put in based on the level of classroom, whether it's a resource classroom, structured learning classroom, SPVS. So this is the pupil to the teacher ratios on there. More special education staffing, just the number of sites we have and the number of classrooms, and we'll get this all out to you so you could review it and come back with changes. So total school-based changes for next year, we have 76 teachers reduced based purely on enrollment, changes in counselors, nurses and librarians reduced based on closing schools, principals changes, and then teacher assistants went down overall, expecting to have fewer classrooms, BPO reductions based on school closures, and the increase in clerical based on going from 1.5 FTE at each school to 2. There wasn't a huge change there. Some of the clerical were reduced from the closed schools, so that's netted in with both the addition of going to 2 FTE in all the schools and the reduction of, I think it was probably 6.5 FTE in between the 3 schools that closed, or the 6.5 FTE from the 3 schools that closed. Or wait, 4.5. Sorry, 3.5.
No,
3.5. That's it.
I want to have a question. So Andy, what is your teacher attrition rate every year? What's the number of general range of number of where you have people that retire? And so I'm trying to get to how the reduction in the staff compared to your regular attrition rate. Is it going to be?
Generally, we hire around 250 to 350 teachers each year.
So you're going to manage the reductions through attrition?
Right.
Okay.
We do the best we can to not have job losses.
Perfect.
Occasionally you do have one. There's someone who's like really highly certified in one specific thing, and that's the program being cut out of high school, and
that's going to go away.
That goes away. It does happen, but if they have an additional cert that they can get, then they will be placed somewhere.
But the number is increasing.
The number of the rate of attrition?
Yes,
Yeah.
the rate of attrition is steadily increased. It was a big jump in the year where the legislature didn't get the budget out on time. It was a big jump that year, but there's also been a consistent increase.
Is that a boomer issue, or is it is it the 401k versus defined benefit?
They're starting to do exit interviews about that because the board asked that same question, and I think some of it relates to class size, some of it relates to the 401k opportunity versus a pension. It's a mixed bag.
and just the insecurity of the state right now. And like what Mr. Donnelly references a couple of years ago when we didn't have a budget, but they're still kicking around ideas of $15 million cut. We ended up pink slipping a couple hundred employees just in case, because we had to meet the statutory deadline of our tenured folks have to be, if we issue layoff notices, it have to be by this year, the 14th of May. Non-tenured has to be issued the layoff slip by the last day of school. So if the state doesn't have a budget by that point, then we have to do our best guess of what it might be and issue layoffs and based on that potential. So special service changes, we've talked about a lot of these. A lot of this is probably more detailed than what you need, just kind of the changes within each program. The big one is the pre-K is adding 25 employees, or FTE, I should say, to that program. And then the other ones are just kind of increasing based on increased need, increased severity of the needs of the students. District-wide changes, the new mentor program we talked about. Teaching and Learning was able to shift some of their money over to grants. And then we added some money for the overall reduction or increase to provide 6 to 8 English language arts. Increased instructional software costs, Lexia, these other increased map testing, all these other programs that the schools use. Those costs are increasing. And then we've increased our major maintenance to help the life cycle extension at a lot of our schools. And then the carpet, tile, painting, and then parking lot repair. So we've added money for that, reduced our attrition, and just kind of other miscellaneous changes within departments, about $5.5 million, and then reorganized some staff. There's in the budget document, in the big document, there's a detailed list of what all those changes are by department. So we do line that out, and you can track it back to each individual department. So that's all I have. I did want to show you the, yeah. So this is our budget handbook. It's got a lot of the information that we just went over in there. It's a little bit more. But when we go places, talk to the legislatures, talk to the community, this is what we bring along. It's kind of a summarized version of the big budget book that we have. So up on the screen is our big budget book. This is available on our website, or if you really want a hard copy of it, we can get you. It's a few inches thick. It's almost 500 pages now. But the layout is really, it's kind of a opening, shows the the district profile, kind of our development calendar, just some long-term planning, and then it has within the book it does have this document as the kind of an executive summary of our budget. So look through there, and it's got the PTR ratios in there, kind of staffing reductions we've had, and all these changes we just discussed. So it's a good reference. And then we have the governmental funds overview. So this just kind of goes over what funds we include in our budget, mostly where the revenue comes from, and then the expenditures are later on. So I read through that, then we get into like the general fund that'll show it by organization, by an object code that tells you kind of what type and give you the history, 3 years of history, the current budget and next year's budget. And then it has it by school as well, or school and department as well. So you can see the cost by school and the FTE by school and department. And it has it by function. There's a lot of information, and it has it for each fund. So that's in the line if you want to look at it, or if you want a hard copy, let me know, and we can certainly arrange that. The other thing that's not included in here, but is, as I was talking to Lance earlier about the governor's proposed reduction of debt reimbursement to the district for all the bond debt that we had sold for anything that was authorized prior to 2015. So that equates to about $41 million of state money that we get to pay for this bond debt. I believe it was $320-some million for the course of the next 19 to 20 years as we pay off that debt. So if that were to be enacted where they no longer fund debt, it would be a few hundred million over the course of the next 20 years. But for the next year, it's about $41 million of state money that we're anticipating. If that money doesn't come from the state, per the ordinance of the bond, it could potentially come from the Anchorage taxpayers. So that's a big one to consider. That we don't have necessarily addressed in this budget. We still understand it's going to be coming from the state as part of this budget.
I think Tasha had a question.
Yes. So I watched the school board meeting on the 19th that went forever, but I saw the $68 million on the memorandum that they passed to ask the state for more money, which I see it as like one of the pluses in both this report and this one, but I don't see the money.
So the money is in
here.
and
It's not listed in the grants, and so
well.
I know that there's always
So
this
it is-
push that the district should, whether it's realistic or not, say what it is that we want, that we would need to have our students have a better chance at success, which I thought was the purpose of those amendments. But it would be nice to see it in here.
So we included in there as part of the evidence-based model. That's what that PTR is, and that's what that $68 million is referencing. So that is included as part of the PTR adjustment as the evidence-based model. Then in the budget book, it's really hard to see. I'll see if we can blow it up. We show the FTE up here. It's not quite the same size on here. Anyway, we show the FTE. That's this 488, the elementary and 246 secondary teachers. And then we have some pre-K teacher assistants in there too. So we show it, the FTE in here, and then we show the dollars does show up in here. So total $89 million of additional legislative grants that the district has included in their budget. So we do preserve that upper limit authority in case the grants come in. But it shows up in here rather than the general fund.
I may have missed this in the presentation, or we might have discussed it earlier, but the thought is that it costs us, at least twice as much to educate students up here in ASD than it does down in the lower 48. I think is what I heard. And I just want to know, in your opinion, what you think is driving that over possibly the lower 48.
I suppose it depends on what the comparison is, right? I mean, because it's considerably cheaper to educate a student in Anchorage than it would be in other parts of Alaska.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, when we see...
That's why I said specifically Anchorage, because I know out in villages it is expensive.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to comment when I haven't seen the amounts that were...
So neither one of you have ever heard that it costs considerably more?
Oh, absolutely.
We've
yeah.
certainly heard it, yes.
Okay.
In fact, Mark Foster did a really fascinating study trying to compare us, really apples to apples, with other states that have similar demographics and geographical challenges, and we're high. We're high. Some of it, of course, is driven by healthcare costs. Healthcare costs in Alaska can be 4 or 5 times as much as you can get the same surgery in Seattle for 1/4 what you pay in Anchorage. And that's a huge driver. In fact, over the last, 5 to 8 years, if you look at where the money, increased amount of spending is going, it's going into healthcare costs rather than into the classrooms. But that's not the only factor. It's a big factor, but it's not the only one.
Okay. And is ASD self-insured on health?
The district, our teachers have their own health plan, and the district has a health plan for, let's say that the custodians, bus drivers, and teachers have their own health plans, and all the other employees are in a district self-insured plan.
So there is definitely room for improvement, but it's going to be very challenging. It's challenging anytime.
So question then to shift to a really high level. The main components of the school district budget being are the BSA defined by the state, the required local contribution, the voluntary local contribution. And my understanding is that the voluntary contribution is capped in concert with the state BSA funding.
Actually, it's a little off.
Is that?
There's the state funding, and then there's a mandatory local amount.
Right.
But then there's more that local governments can do beyond the mandatory amount. And Anchorage has maxed out on what it can contribute towards the core classroom costs of the Anchorage School District. Now, Mat-Su doesn't. They're not all the way up to the maximum. They're at somewhat below that. So there's that third element. You were on, except for that final element.
No, but I mean, I think I might have said it wrong, but yeah.
But the max is tied to the state
required
funding. It's 23% of what basic need is the additional allowable calculation.
And
Right,
so what's
so-
really
yeah.
significant about that is the transportation additional money that the board asked for from the city is outside that cap.
Right.
Because it's not a classroom function, it's a transportation function.
Right.
But our shortfall is directly impacting our classrooms because we have less money to put into the classroom.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's just concerning to
Right.
me. I mean, there's.
So as the budgets, if the state were to cut the BSA or something, then we'd have to make a corresponding reduction of about 20% of what that reduction, 23% of that reduction into local funding.
There's a lot could be done with the state school funding formula that would really be much fairer and beneficial to Anchorage, such as allowing Anchorage more local options for funding. It's pretty arbitrary, the existing caps on local governments in there now. It really wasn't based on any, like, court said, well, you have to do this amount. It was just kind of like a compromise thing the legislature did.
Right. So I assume that's something that the Assembly is concerned with right now, though, too, is what might happen on that front. I know we don't have someone from the Assembly here, but
I do think they are. I think for the Budget Advisory Commission, this, as what I think you guys, on the information here, the school district's budget is going to get introduced to the Assembly on the 5th. They're going to have a public hearing on it. 2 weeks after that would be, the 19th or whatever the day is. And then they'll pass the budget. And when they pass the budget, they're going to do a couple things. They're going to accept the proposal that's been presented by the board with the assumptions that Andy talked about, one of them being it does not include the recovery of the $42 million in the proposal. It assumes that there will be a change in the budget than what the governor has already proposed. And their allocation of the resources, including an adjustment for the transportation services, which they have, which I think is a good idea that they've done. All of that calculation gives to a mill rate that would establish part of the total taxes that we will be assessing to the public in May. It's about 7.15 mills in total. And when our budget, so they're going to approve that. That will then get added to the general government, and the sum of those two will be the total amount of mill that will assess property taxpayers. It'll be, probably 15 on average, 15.3, and so that's where the two of them come together. And I think for the BAC, if there's philosophically you don't think it's a good idea that they don't include the if it's philosophically you think they should be doing something more drastic because of what the governor's proposed and the legislature hasn't acted, I think those are the things that you should be thinking about. And I can work with Andy to draft something up. We'll send it to you. You consider it next week. You have 2 weeks before you actually have to submit it. You need to get it to the Assembly before they take action, which will be on the 19th. That's why we did this today, so we could put something together for you guys. You have some time to think about it. If there's crazy stuff about tax, if there's other crazy stuff that in here that you guys want to advise the administration or the Assembly, at this point, the board's already taken action, so that's kind of that wouldn't be relevant at this point right now. So you guys you had a little bit last week, a little bit more today. Take some time to think about it. I'll get Andy to draft something up, pass it around to you and Alyssa, then ship it to you guys, and that's where we'll go. my plan would be, we would have a draft resolution for you for consideration next Thursday when you get together. Try to get it to you Monday or Tuesday. You can think about it, and if you don't, if you're not satisfied then, you got a little time, we can do it after that date. So that's kind of the correct course of action.
Right.
That's where we're at.
Cool.
And
Carla, you look confused.
The back couple of pages we have is,
No, next week. You have a
Oh, I
meeting
thought you
next
said
week.
you got a little bit last week, you got a little bit, and I was like, what?
No, I'm sorry. You had a little bit at the last meeting.
Last meeting,
My
gotcha.
mistake.
Okay,
My
sorry
mistake.
about that.
within our budget, we do have the mill rate calculation in here, as well as the upper limit spending calculation. So it's the last 2 pages of the budget if you get online and look at it.
But it looks like you have to go through 474 pages of pure joy and bliss before you get to this page.
You
right?
do.
Okay. Excellent.
We've made it where you can't go forward without actually reading the first prior page.
Scans your eyes.
Timed out.
Any other questions? You can always reach me offline. You know, email me or call me if you have any questions as you're going through it.
I'm going to be I sent a draft agenda out. I got some adjustments from the chair and the vice chair. We're going to spend, next week, we're going to spend about 30 minutes of your time. You're going to get a report on property, on the assessed valuation for 19 property tax assessments. But what I'm going to be sending you is the draft alcohol tax later next week. And I think I'm going to give you some information about first quarter budget revisions, but in a nutshell, based on the governor's budget, proposed budget, I sent out a directive to the department heads Wednesday morning asking them to give a proposal to the Assembly to reduce our 2019 budget by $10 million. We're going to have that next week, and then fund balance will come in. So at your April meeting, you will have all of those pieces of information so you can give the Assembly some recommendations as they consider first quarter. On April 9th, it'll get introduced, so you have your April meeting to think about that. But
So FY19, to reduce their FY19 budget?
yes, by
that
10
was already
million.
approved last.
Yes,
Is that based on state?
in part. So basically, it's based on 2 pieces. The assumption that revenue sharing will not happen, which is about a little more than $6 million. That's what we have budget. And the other part is the reductions to Medicaid and some of the services that it would have. We get a significant amount of reimbursement in Medicaid and ambulance transports. That could go away. We wouldn't. That's $3+ million. And then there's some other ancillary folks. There's some programs that the state would not support in nursing and a variety of other things that have some direct and compounding effects. And so the sum of those is roughly about $10 million. So that's where we're going with that.
And Lance, I sent an email out, I think, to everybody asking if we had discussed the tax cuts that the Assembly is considering for downtown development. I don't know if I ever got an answer from anyone. Did we ever discuss that?
You guys have not. So what Carla's mentioning is the Assembly is considering an ordinance that would adjust the tax abatement for downtown development, primarily for housing. That has not been on your, that hasn't been a discussion item, and I don't know where. I have to find out where it is on the Assembly process. But
I had thought that they had already acted on it, the Assembly. Did I? Maybe I had that wrong.
I kind of thought they did too,
Yeah.
and that kind of is a bummer that we didn't have a chance to discuss. Not that it probably would change their mind.
what'd you say, Desiree? Their work session on it right now?
There's the work session on 2019-12, the Central Business District Housing Incentive.
Let's storm the place.
All right, it's right downstairs.
Okay, so it hasn't been acted on. Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time on this extra day. I appreciate it.
So, Lance, are we going to you're going to find out where we're at, and then
Yep.
we'll discuss it, or we're going to, okay.
I'll find out where we're at and then find out what the schedule is, what the chair of the Assembly is, and I will let all of you know.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. Desiree, will you let me know that?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to pull these over on your desktop. You can see them.
All right, thanks everybody.
All right,
Thank
we're
you,
done.
Andy.
Thank you.
Yep.